The morning fog hung thick over the port of Aldermere as Lady Margaret Thornfield stepped off the luxury cruise ship Time's Golden Crown **. Her designer heels clicked against the wet cobblestones as she made her way toward the customs building, pulling behind her an ornate burgundy suitcase that had seen better days. The vintage leather showed signs of age, with brass corners that had lost their shine and a small tear near the handle that she had carefully hidden with a silk scarf. Margaret had always been known in the social circles of neighboring Kingdom of Westmere as an eccentric collector. Her mansion was filled with antiques, paintings, and curiosities she had gathered during her travels across Europe. At 62, she had the sharp eyes of someone who could spot valuable items at flea markets and estate sales from miles away. Her silver hair was always perfectly styled, and she wore her expensive jewelry with the confidence of someone born into old money. The customs officer, a young man named David Sterling, had been working at the port for only 6 months. He was known for his attention to detail and his ability to spot suspicious behavior. As Margaret approached his station, something about her nervous glances and the way she gripped her suitcase handle made him pause. She kept looking over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to follow her. "Good morning, Lady Thornfield," David said politely, recognizing her from previous trips. "Anything to declare today?" Margaret's smile seemed forced. "Oh, nothing special, dear. Just some souvenirs from my trip to the French countryside. You know how it is. One always finds little treasures in those charming antique shops." David nodded but noticed the slight tremor in her voice. "I'll need to take a look inside, if you don't mind. Standard procedure for returning passengers." As Margaret lifted the suitcase onto the examination table, David could hear something metallic shifting inside. The weight seemed inconsistent with typical travel items. When she opened the locks with shaking hands, David immediately noticed that the interior was packed unusually carefully, with items wrapped in layers of old newspapers and silk cloth. "May I?" David asked, reaching for one of the wrapped bundles. Margaret stepped back, her face growing pale. The first item he unwrapped was a small silver box with intricate engravings. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Tiny roses and vines covered every surface, and the silver had a particular gleam that suggested great age and quality. Inside the box was lined with deep blue velvet, and there was a small compartment that appeared designed to hold jewelry. "This is quite beautiful," David commented, examining the hallmarks on the bottom. "Where did you purchase this?" Margaret's answer came too quickly. "A little shop in Provence. I don't remember the exact name. So many shops, you know." David set the box aside and reached for a larger bundle. As he carefully unwrapped the newspapers, which he noticed were dated from several months ago, he revealed a stunning necklace. The piece featured a large sapphire surrounded by diamonds, with smaller sapphires and pearls creating an elaborate pattern. The gold setting was clearly antique, and the design was unlike anything he had seen in modern jewelry stores. "And this?" David asked, holding the necklace up to the light. The sapphire caught the fluorescent lighting and seemed to glow with an inner fire. Margaret's hands were now visibly shaking. "Also from France. An estate sale. I have all the paperwork somewhere." I have all the paperwork somewhere." But David was already reaching for his phone. Something about these items seemed familiar, though he couldn't place where he might have seen them before. The quality and style suggested they were not ordinary antiques. As someone who had studied art history before joining customs, he recognized the hallmarks of royal craftsmanship. The third item made David's suspicions concrete. It was a small crown or tiara, designed clearly for a young person or perhaps ceremonial use. The piece featured the same sapphires and diamonds as the necklace, and the gold work showed the same distinctive style. Around the base of the crown were tiny engravings that looked like they might be letters or symbols. "Lady Thornfield," David said carefully, "I'm going to need you to wait here while I make a phone call." Margaret's composure finally cracked. "Please, you don't understand. I can explain everything. These items, they're not what you think." "What exactly do I think they are?" David asked, studying her reaction. I need to speak with someone in authority. Someone who understands the complicated nature of family inheritances." David was already dialing the number for the Royal Heritage Department. a special division that handled matters involving the Kingdom of Aldermere's royal family and historical artifacts. As he waited for someone to answer, he continued unwrapping items from Margaret's suitcase. Each new piece was more remarkable than the last. There was a matching bracelet to the necklace, a pair of earrings that seemed designed to complete the set, and several rings featuring the same distinctive sapphires. All the pieces appeared to be part of a coordinated collection, the kind of jewelry set that might be created for someone of great importance. Heritage Department. "This is Sandra Mills," came a crisp voice through the phone. "This is David Sterling at Port Customs. I have a situation here that I think requires your expertise. I'm looking at what appears to be a collection of very valuable antique jewelry, possibly of royal significance." There was a pause. "Can you describe what you're seeing?" David looked down at the collection spread across his table. A sapphire and diamond necklace with matching pieces, a small tiara, and several other items. The craftsmanship suggests they're quite old and very valuable. The passenger claims she purchased them in France, but something about her story doesn't add up. "Don't let anyone leave," Sandra said urgently. "I'm sending someone immediately. Can you photograph the items and send them to my secure email?" As David began taking pictures with his department's camera, Margaret sank into a nearby chair. Her carefully composed exterior had completely disappeared, replaced by the look of someone whose secrets were about to be exposed. "The Royal Heritage Department?" Margaret asked quietly. "You think these are connected to the royal family?" "I think," David said, focusing his camera on the intricate engravings of the tiara, "that we're about to find out exactly where these items came from." Within 30 minutes, Sandra Mills arrived at the customs office, accompanied by Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, the kingdom's leading expert on royal artifacts and history. Dr. Blackwood was a woman in her 70s, with white hair pulled back in a practical bun and glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck. Her reputation for identifying historical artifacts was legendary throughout the academic community. The moment Dr. Blackwood saw the items laid out on David's table, her face went completely white. She picked up the tiara with trembling hands and examined the engravings around the base with a magnifying glass she produced from her handbag. "My God," she whispered. "Sandra, look at this." Sandra leaned in as Dr. Blackwood pointed to the tiny engravings. "These are the initials, P.A., Princess Adelaide. And this," she turned the tiara to show a small maker's mark. "This is the signature of Heinrich Goldsmith, the court jeweler who worked exclusively for the royal family in the 1890 seconds. Margaret made a small sound, almost like a sob, from her chair in the corner. "Lady Thornfield," Sandra said firmly. "These appear to be items that belonged to Princess Adelaide, who disappeared during the Revolution of 1889. These pieces have been missing for over 130 years. They're not just valuable, they're part of our national heritage." Dr. Blackwood was now examining each piece with intense concentration. "This is Princess Adelaide's coming-of-age jewelry set. It was commissioned by Queen Victoria II for her daughter's 18th birthday, just months before the revolution began. The entire set was thought to have been lost when the princess fled the country. According to our records," Sandra added, consulting her phone, "Princess Adelaide was last seen boarding a ship bound for France with a small group of loyal servants. She was carrying only a few personal belongings. The family assumed this jewelry set was among the items lost when she died in exile." Margaret finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "She didn't die in exile." The room fell silent. Dr. Blackwood set down the necklace she had been examining and turned to face Margaret directly. "What did you say?" Margaret looked up, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Princess Adelaide didn't die in exile. She lived. She had a family. She had children." Sandra and Dr. Blackwood exchanged glances. The implications of Margaret's words were staggering. "How could you possibly know that?" Dr. Blackwood asked. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a small, leather-bound diary. The cover was worn smooth with age, and the pages were yellowed around the edges. She held it out with shaking hands. "Because," Margaret said quietly, "Princess Adelaide was my great-great-grandmother." The silence in the customs office was so complete that the only sound was the ticking of the old wall clock. Dr. Blackwood's magnifying glass hung forgotten from its chain as she stared at Margaret Thornfield. Sandra Mills had gone completely still, her phone frozen halfway to her ear. "That's impossible," Dr. Blackwood said finally. "Princess Adelaide died childless in France in 1891. We have documentation from the French authorities." Margaret clutched the leather diary tighter. "You have documentation of someone who claimed to be Princess Adelaide. The real princess assumed a new identity when she reached France. She had to disappear completely to stay alive." Sandra stepped forward. "Lady Thornfield, these are very serious claims. If what you're saying is true, it would rewrite a significant part of our royal history. But we need proof beyond your word and a diary that could have come from anywhere." Dr. Blackwood adjusted her glasses and held out her hand for the diary. "May I examine this? As a historian, I can tell you immediately if it's authentic or a clever forgery." Margaret hesitated for a moment, then handed over the diary. "It belonged to my great-great-grandmother. She wrote in it every day from the time she fled Aldermere until shortly before her death in 1923. She lived under the name Marie Dubois and worked as a governess for wealthy families in the French countryside." As Dr. Blackwood opened the diary, the sweet smell of old paper and faded ink filled the air. The handwriting was small and precise, written in a mixture of English and French. The first entry was dated the 15th of October 1889, just 3 days after Princess Adelaide was reported to have fled the kingdom. "The writing style is consistent with educated women of that period," Dr. Blackwood murmured, turning pages carefully. "And the paper and ink appear to be authentic to the time period. But handwriting can be learned, and old materials can be found. Diuzion. She stopped at a particular entry and began reading aloud. "Today I cut my hair short and dyed it brown. I must never again look like the princess they seek. Marie Dubois will be a simple woman with no past, no family, and no claim to anything greater than honest work. The jewels are hidden safely, the last connection to who I once was." Sandra leaned over Dr. Blackwood's shoulder. "That could have been written by anyone with knowledge of the historical events." Margaret spoke up. "Look at the entry dated December 3rd, 1889. Dr. Blackwood flipped forward several pages and found the date. As she read, her expression began to change. "She writes here about a secret passage in the palace that led from her bedroom to the old chapel. She describes exactly how to access it. Behind the tapestry with the white rose, count 7 stones from the corner, press the one with the small chip." "So?" Sandra asked. "So," Dr. Blackwood said slowly. "That passage was sealed up in the 1922 during renovations. The only official record of its existence is in architectural documents that were classified until 1985. This diary predates those documents being made public by almost 100 years. Margaret nodded. "There's more." She describes the location where she hid a second set of jewelry before fleeing. Pieces that were too large to carry safely. Dr. Blackwood's hands were shaking as she turned more pages. Where did she hide them? Read the entry from October 10th, 1889. Dr. Blackwood found the page and read silently, her eyes growing wider with each line. She writes that she buried a jewelry box containing her mother's emerald collection beneath the old oak tree in the private garden, exactly 12 steps from the garden gate toward the fountain, then 6 steps to the left. Sandra was already reaching for her phone. "We need to contact the palace immediately, if there really is something buried in the royal garden." "Wait," Dr. Blackwood said, still reading. "There's something else here that only Princess Adelaide could have known." She looked up at Margaret. She describes a birthmark on her brother Prince Edmund's shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon. That information was never made public. "I've read every biography and historical account." Margaret smiled sadly. "My great-great-grandmother told my great-grandmother many stories about her family. She never forgot them, even though she could never return to them." Dr. Blackwood closed the diary carefully. "This is either the most elaborate historical forgery ever created, or we're looking at genuine documentation from Princess Adelaide herself. But even if this diary is real, we still need to verify your family connection. Margaret reached back into her purse and pulled out a small envelope that looked almost as old as the diary. I have her marriage certificate. She married a French carpenter named Henri Dubois in 1892, and I have birth certificates for all her children, including my great-grandmother, Charlotte Dubois. Sandra examined the documents while Dr. Blackwood continued studying the jewelry pieces. The marriage certificate was written in French, with official stamps and signatures that appeared authentic. The birth certificates showed 3 children born to Marie and Henri Dubois between 1893 and 1898. These look genuine, Sandra admitted, but documents can be forged. We'll need to have our experts verify their authenticity. Dr. Blackwood had picked up the sapphire necklace again and was examining it under her magnifying glass. I'm looking at something very interesting here. There are tiny scratches on the back of the main sapphire. They look deliberate, not accidental wear. She showed the others what she had found. When viewed under the magnifying glass, the scratches formed letters. A. V. R. Adelaide Victoria Rose. Princess Adelaide's full name. A personal marking, Dr. Blackwood said with growing excitement. Princess Adelaide was known to be very careful about her possessions. According to court records, she had all her jewelry privately marked in case of theft. Margaret watched as the experts examined each piece. She told her children that someday, when it was safe, these items should return to the royal family. But the political situation in Aldermere remained unstable for decades. Then came the World Wars, and the family had their own struggles just to survive. Sandra looked up from the documents. Why now? Why are you bringing these items back now? More than a century later, Margaret's expression grew somber. Because I'm the last one. My daughter died in a car accident 5 years ago. She had no children. When I'm gone, there will be no one left who knows the true story. I couldn't bear the thought of these treasures ending up in some estate sale, sold to strangers who would never know their real significance. Dr. Blackwood was now examining the diary again, reading entries from different time periods. This is remarkable. She documented her entire life in exile. Look at this entry from 1901. She writes about reading in a French newspaper that her brother Prince Edmund had died and that her cousin had taken the throne. She knew about events in Aldermere throughout her life, but she could never return. Why couldn't she return? Sandra asked. The revolution ended in 1892. The new government granted amnesty to most royal family members. Margaret sighed. According to my great-great-grandmother, she had seen something on the night she fled, something that could have put her life in danger if she ever returned. She never told her children exactly what it was, only that certain people would kill her if they knew she had survived. Dr. Blackwood looked up sharply. What kind of thing? She witnessed the murder of someone important during the revolution. Someone whose death was covered up and blamed on accident. She wrote about it in the diary, but in a code that she taught to her daughter. The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. If Princess Adelaide had witnessed a murder during the revolution, and if she had documented it, the historical consequences could be enormous. Sandra was typing rapidly on her phone. I'm contacting the palace historian and the royal archives. If these claims are true, we need expert analysis immediately. Dr. Blackwood, how long would you need to authenticate the diary properly, with proper equipment and access to comparative handwriting samples from the palace archives? 2 weeks. Maybe 3. But preliminary analysis suggests it's genuine. Margaret stood up slowly. I understand you need to verify everything. I'm prepared to cooperate fully. I've waited 5 years to find the right time to bring these items forward. I can wait a little longer for the truth to be established. Dr. Blackwood carefully wrapped the jewelry pieces in soft cloths and placed them in a secure case she had brought. These items will be taken to the palace for proper examination and storage. If they are authentic royal artifacts, They belong in the royal collection. Sandra finished her phone call and turned back to the group. I've spoken with the palace. They want to see everything immediately. Lady Thornfield, you'll need to come with us to provide a full statement about how you came to possess these items. Margaret nodded. I expected as much. I've brought copies of all the family documents I have: birth certificates, death certificates, letters, photographs, everything I could find that traces the family line from Princess Adelaide to me. As they prepared to leave the customs office, Dr. Blackwood paused at the door. Lady Thornfield, there's one more thing I need to ask. You mentioned that Princess Adelaide hid something in the royal garden. Has anyone ever tried to look for it? Margaret shook her head. As far as I know, no one in my family ever returned to Aldermere. My great-great-grandmother made her children promise never to come back while she was alive. She was too afraid of what might happen. But the diary gives specific directions to find this hidden jewelry? Yes, she drew a small map on one of the last pages, along with detailed instructions. She said it was her insurance. If her children were ever truly desperate, they could return for the emerald collection, but they should only do it if they had no other choice. Sandra locked the customs office behind them as they walked toward the official palace car that had arrived to transport them. We'll be testing the ground in that location within the week. Ground-penetrating radar will show us if anything is buried there without disturbing the garden. As they drove through the streets of Aldermere toward the palace, Margaret stared out the window at the city that her great-great-grandmother had fled more than a century ago. The buildings had changed. The people were different. But the royal palace still stood on the hill overlooking the harbor, its towers and spires silhouetted against the gray sky. She used to tell her children stories about this place, Margaret said quietly. About the gardens and the grand ballrooms. About the view from her bedroom window. She made them promise to remember. Even though she could never bring them here herself, Dr. Blackwood was still holding the diary carefully in her lap. If this is all authentic, it means Princess Adelaide lived almost twice as long as we thought, and that she had descendants who have been living in France all this time. It changes everything we know about the end of the direct royal line. Quote, Sandra looked at Margaret through the rearview mirror. Are you prepared for what this might mean? If your claims are verified, you could have a legitimate claim to a place in the royal succession. Margaret smiled sadly. I don't want a crown or a title. I'm a 62-year-old woman from France who collects antiques. I just wanted to return what belonged to the family and to tell the true story before it was lost forever. The palace gates came into view, flanked by guards in their traditional uniforms. As their car passed through the entrance, Margaret felt a strange mixture of emotions. Sadness for her great-great-grandmother, who had never been able to return, and relief that the long-held family secret would finally be told. 3 weeks later, the palace conference room was filled with experts, documents, and scientific equipment. Dr. Eleanor Blackwood sat at the head of a long table, covered with analysis reports, while Margaret Thornfield waited nervously in a chair by the window. Sandra Mills paced near a wall covered with photographs and genealogical charts that traced family connections across more than a century. The results are conclusive, Dr. Blackwood announced to the assembled group. Every test we've conducted confirms that these items are authentic royal artifacts from the 1,890 seconds. The diary has been verified by 3 independent handwriting experts. The paper and ink have been dated correctly, and the jewelry matches exactly with detailed descriptions from the royal inventory of 1,889. Professor James Hartwell, the palace historian, adjusted his glasses and looked up from a thick folder. More importantly, we've verified Lady Thornfield's family line. DNA testing confirms that she is indeed descended from someone closely related to the royal family of that period. The birth and marriage records all check out. They're genuine documents from French civil authorities. Margaret felt a wave of relief wash over her. For weeks, she had worried that somehow the evidence wouldn't be enough, that the story her family had preserved for generations might be dismissed as fantasy. Sandra pointed to the wall chart. We've traced the family line from Princess Adelaide, who became Marie Dubois, through 4 generations to Margaret. Every connection is documented and verified. Dr. Blackwood opened the diary to a page marked with a small ribbon. But perhaps most significantly, we found this entry that we initially missed. It's written in a code that Princess Adelaide developed, using a substitution cipher based on French flower names. Once we decoded it, the entry tells us exactly what she witnessed on the night she fled. The room grew quiet as Dr. Blackwood began to read. I saw Lord Harrison kill Minister Collins in the library. Harrison thought no one was watching. But I had hidden behind the curtains when I heard angry voices. Collins was about to expose Harrison's plan to steal money meant for the People's Relief Fund. Harrison strangled him with his own tie, then arranged the scene to look like Collins had fallen and hit his head. I cannot return while Harrison lives, for he would kill me to protect his secret. Professor Hartwell nodded grimly. Lord Harrison was indeed one of the leaders of the revolution. He lived until 1911 and was considered a hero for his role in establishing the new government. If Princess Adelaide had returned and accused him of murder, it would have destroyed his reputation and possibly led to his execution. Margaret spoke for the first time that day. She wrote that she watched him from afar, through newspaper reports and contacts in Aldermere. She knew when he died in 1911, but by then, she had built a whole new life as Marie Dubois. Her children were French citizens, and she was terrified that if she revealed the truth, they would all be in danger from Harrison's supporters. Sandra walked to the window and looked out at the royal garden below. Yesterday, we completed the excavation in the garden, following the exact directions from Princess Adelaide's diary. Our team found a metal jewelry box, buried beneath the old oak tree. Dr. Blackwood smiled for the first time in weeks. The emerald collection was exactly where she said it would be. 12 pieces in total, including a tiara that belonged to Queen Victoria II, Princess Adelaide's mother. The items had been wrapped in oiled cloth and placed in a waterproof container. After more than 130 years underground, they're in remarkable condition. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She was telling the truth about everything. All those family stories that seemed too fantastic to believe. Professor Hartwell opened another folder. We've also solved a historical mystery that has puzzled scholars for decades. Minister Collins' death in 1889 was always suspicious, but without evidence, historians assumed it was either an accident or natural causes. Princess Adelaide's testimony provides the missing piece. Sandra returned to the table. The question now is what to do with all this information. We have proof that Princess Adelaide survived and had descendants. We have her jewelry collection. And we have evidence of a murder that changed the course of our history. Dr. Blackwood closed the diary carefully. From a historical perspective, this discovery is invaluable. Princess Adelaide's diary provides first-hand accounts of the royal family during the Revolution, details about palace life that we never had before, and insights into the political situation of that time. Margaret looked around the room at all the experts who had worked to verify her family's story. What about Lord Harrison? Will his reputation be affected by this revelation? Professor Hartwell considered the question. Harrison has been dead for more than a century, and most of his political achievements have already been re-evaluated by modern historians. This new information adds to our understanding of the revolution, but it doesn't change the fact that the monarchy's fall was inevitable given the social and economic conditions of the time. Sandra sat down across from Margaret. There's something else we need to discuss. Technically, if Princess Adelaide had legitimate descendants, there could be implications for the royal succession. Margaret held up her hand. I want to make something very clear. I have no interest in claiming any title or position. I'm French. I'm proud to be French. And I have no desire to become involved in royal politics. I brought these items back because they belong here, with the family they were made for. Dr. Blackwood nodded approvingly. That's very wise. The current royal family has ruled successfully for over a century. Princess Adelaide's line was broken when she went into exile and assumed a new identity. You're absolutely right that these items belong in the royal collection where they can be properly preserved and displayed. Professor Hartwell was making notes in a leather journal. We'll need to update all the historical records. Of course. The official story of Princess Adelaide's fate will need to be corrected in museums, textbooks, and royal archives. She deserves to be remembered for surviving against impossible odds and building a new life for herself and her family. Sandra looked thoughtful. What about the jewelry that was found in the garden? Some of those pieces could be displayed publicly, along with excerpts from the diary. It would be a fascinating exhibition about royal history and family preservation. Margaret brightened at the suggestion. My great-great-grandmother would have loved that. She always said the most important thing was that the story be remembered correctly, not the version that was convenient for the people in power. Number 4. Dr. Blackwood began gathering the reports and documents. I'd like to propose that we create a comprehensive historical record of this discovery. The diary should be published, with scholarly notes explaining the historical context. Princess Adelaide's voice deserves to be heard after being silenced for so long. Professor Hartwell agreed. And we should establish a small memorial in the palace grounds, acknowledging her survival and the family she raised in exile. It would be a fitting tribute to her courage and determination. Sandra stood up and walked to a window overlooking the harbor. You know, from this window you can see the exact spot where Princess Adelaide would have boarded the ship that took her to France. She probably looked back at this palace, thinking she would never see it again. Margaret joined her at the window. According to family stories, she used to stand at the window of her cottage in France and look toward the east, toward Aldermere. She never stopped thinking about home, even though she could never return. Dr. Blackwood packed the diary into a special preservation case. In a way, she has returned. Her story, her voice, her memories. They're all here now, and they'll be preserved for future generations to learn from. Over the following months, the discovery of Princess Adelaide's true fate became one of the most significant historical revelations in the kingdom's recent memory. The diary was carefully transcribed and published, providing historians with unprecedented insights into royal life during the Revolutionary period. The jewelry collection was restored and put on display in the Palace Museum, with detailed explanations of how each piece had been hidden and preserved by the princess's descendants. Margaret returned to her home in France, but not before being honored by the current royal family for her role in returning the lost artifacts. She was awarded the Order of Cultural Merit, the kingdom's highest honor for contributions to national heritage. The emerald collection found in the royal garden was restored to its original glory and displayed alongside Princess Adelaide's sapphire jewelry. Visitors to the Palace Museum could see the complete story. The princess's flight into exile, her life as Marie Dubois, the family that kept her secrets for generations, and the eventual return of her treasures to their rightful home. Dr. Blackwood wrote the definitive scholarly account of the discovery, which won international awards for historical research. Professor Hartwell worked with French historians to document the princess's life in exile, creating a complete picture of her experiences from royal daughter to governess to family matriarch. Sandra Mills was promoted to head of the Royal Heritage Department, in recognition of her role in handling the sensitive discovery and ensuring that all proper procedures were followed. She established new protocols for investigating claims about royal artifacts and family connections. The memorial to Princess Adelaide was unveiled on the anniversary of her flight from the kingdom. A simple stone marker in the palace garden, near the oak tree where she had hidden her mother's emeralds, bore an inscription: in memory of Princess Adelaide Victoria Rose, who survived impossible circumstances with grace and courage, and whose family preserved her legacy across 4 generations. Margaret attended the unveiling ceremony, accompanied by several relatives from France who had come to learn about their royal ancestor. As she stood in the garden where Princess Adelaide had once walked, Margaret felt that her great-great-grandmother's story had finally come full circle. The mystery that had begun with a routine customs inspection had revealed not just lost jewelry, but a lost chapter of history. Princess Adelaide's diary became required reading in history courses. Her jewelry collection drew visitors from around the world, and her story of survival and reinvention inspired people facing their own difficult circumstances. Most importantly, the truth had been preserved and honored, just as Princess Adelaide had hoped when she carefully documented her life in exile and passed the story down through her family. Her voice, silenced for more than a century by fear and political necessity, had finally been heard. The royal treasures had returned home, and the princess's courage and sacrifice had taken their rightful place in the kingdom's history. Margaret often received letters from historians and researchers who had read about the discovery. Many wanted to know more about growing up with such an extraordinary family secret. She always replied that the most remarkable thing was not the hidden royal connection, but the strength of the women who had preserved the truth through generations of uncertainty and hardship. My great-great-grandmother, Margaret would write, was brave enough to survive when survival seemed impossible, and wise enough to trust that someday the truth would be safe to tell. She gave up everything she was born to be, so that her children could have the chance to become whatever they chose to be. That's the real treasure she left behind.